Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to live stream with me, Dr. Aparajita Jeetagunta. I am the founder and CEO of AJ Rao LLC, which is a boutique firm that specializes in creating customized, comprehensive strategies and solutions for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness, as well as customized whole person conscientious leadership development and leadership presence trainings. I'm also the creator of the C3EB Summit, the Culturally Competent Conversations for Equity and Belongingness, which quick announcement on that before we get into the topic of this live stream today, which is about identity blindness and what the heck that even means. But our next C3EB Summit is coming to you November 19th and 20th of this year. We could not wait until next year. So we are bringing the C3EB Summit back on November 19th and 20th of this year. The launch, registration, sponsorship launches, and everything starts next week. So stay tuned for that. I am so excited, and the theme is going to be awesome, and it's going to set us up really well to get us out of this dumpster fire of 2020 and to really step into 2021 to have the maximum impact that we can. And my talk, this live stream today, I wanted to keep it very short and very quick, actually relates to looking forward by learning from the past. Today, what I wanted to talk to you about is identity blindness, as we've seen it in the history of DEI&B in human history. DEI&B stands for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness. So this concept of identity blindness came to me through this current US election cycle for the presidential election more than anything else. And it was something that I was mulling over, and it constantly kept coming up in my head about everything that's going on and how we are all, whether we realize it or not, most of us are practicing identity blindness still. Now, to understand and to unpack what identity blindness means, we have to take a look at the history of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness as we know it through human history. So let's start there. And in a nutshell, I'll unpack all of this for you. So if we look at diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness, that last piece, belongingness, is actually the human need and the deliverable or the outcome that we as human beings all seek. All of us, no matter who we are, no matter what our background is, no matter what our life experiences have been, have had at least one moment in our lives where we have felt othered, where we have felt like we haven't belonged. And I've said this in some of my other talks many times before, but I want to reiterate that. That idea of, oh my gosh, I don't feel like I belong, whether it's on a schoolyard, whether it's in a high school cafeteria where people are segregated into various groups, whether it's in the professional realm where you don't feel like you fit into the corporate culture, or whether it's any sort of community space, all of us have had those moments where we felt like we did not belong. And those moments made us feel awful, miserable, isolated, alienated, ostracized, like an imposter. That is because all human beings have a fundamental need to belong that is built into our human fabric as a species. It is that need to belong that empowered us and enabled us to create our tribes, clans, communities, moving upward in civilization to cities, countries, and society as we know it. All of that is based on this very fundamental principle of the need to belong, no matter who we are. So that's the first layer. Now I'm going to stack these other pieces, diversity, equity, and inclusion, onto that layer. The reality about diversity is that diversity is a natural part of human life. No matter what animal species you look at, including human beings, diversity has always existed. In, bringing it back to human beings, we've always had trans folks as a part of the spectrum of the gender spectrum in human lives. We have always had folks who have different skin tones than us, different shades than us, different eye capacities, or prescriptions, different abilities, different talents, and unique skill sets. So diversity has always existed. When we say we want to focus on diversity, especially coming out of corporate America, think about what we're saying there, because diversity has always existed. Diversity has been a part of the reality of human existence as long as human beings have existed. So with that being said, for us to belong, it no longer makes sense to just focus on diversity numbers, because the thing that has gotten in the way of really representing diversity and really helping people belong is actually the equity and inclusion pieces, right? Because our language systems, our societal structures, our social structures, and our norms, the way we operate, our etiquettes, while diversity has always existed, inclusion has not. Because of, again, a lot of human factors like human biases, us versus them mentality, which is also a part of our evolutionary history, the in-group versus out-group. There's a lot of evolutionary psychology and social psychology behind this. But at the end of the day, while diversity has always existed, our understanding of diversity in terms of the language we use, in terms of the labels we use, and our implementation of inclusion based on the language we use, that's the part that has changed over human history. The equity, the fairness of inclusion of all of these different types of diverse people, that's the part that has changed. Because again, trans folk have existed since the beginning of humanity, but it is only now that we are starting to talk about equal rights for trans folks. Does that mean that all of a sudden trans folks came out of nowhere and that they're like a completely new creation in humanity? No, it's just that the rest of us, our languages and the way we behave has caught up to what's always been there as a part of our human nature, our human tapestry in life. Now, where does all of this tie into this thing I call identity blindness? So identity blindness is like color blindness, right? A lot of people say they don't see color or that they'd like to be colorblind. In fact, it was a very popular psychological and scientific notion and theory that was coming out 20, 30 years ago that it's better to be colorblind. And there was even a song about it, Free Your Mind. But truly speaking, colorblindness is a medical condition. It is not a good thing. Colorblindness literally is a medical condition. Now, I'm not knocking anybody that has colorblindness when I say it is not a good thing, but what I am saying is that I don't think we should use a medical condition that affects how people perceive the world through their eyes, that drastically affects one of our senses that help us experience the world. I don't think we should use a medical condition about that as our go-to on how to move forward. So color blindness is not the answer. Identity blindness is much like color blindness, just not about just the color of somebody's skin. Identity blindness is when you choose not to understand, appreciate, acknowledge, and celebrate the individual identity expressions of a person, when you don't understand their intersectionalities, when you don't understand how somebody's lived experiences are different because of the fact that they happen to be a person of color who is an immigrant, who is, expresses their gender as a female and has multiple disabilities. When you don't choose to understand that the intersection of all of those layers of that person's life creates a very unique lived experience, a very nuanced lived experience, you are practicing identity blindness, because what you're essentially saying is, I'm going to take this beautiful 4D version of you and I'm going to flatten you into a 2D version of whatever my assumptions about you are. And by doing that, I'm going to minimize your lived experience. I'm going to minimize your perspective. I'm going to minimize your voice. So identity blindness is one of the biggest roots of how people have gotten marginalized and rendered invisible over the course of their whole lives, over the course of human history again. Now, why has identity blindness been coming up a lot for me in my thoughts? Because with everything going on in America right now, with hiring slowing down, with the presidential election coming up, with white supremacy not being condemned by even the highest leader of this country, by violent groups being not even tacitly, but in some ways overtly endorsed, the intersectionalities of those who are different, the intersectionalities of those who don't believe in white supremacy, who are affected by white supremacy, who are victimized by this so-called elite majority, or however you want to classify it, by this violence, really, by this supremacist, racist, structural violence. We are harming our society by perpetuating identity blindness. We are harming our society by perpetuating identity blindness when we don't look at how different populations are affected by COVID-19. We are perpetuating identity blindness even when we say that COVID-19 is a hoax. We are perpetuating identity blindness even while saying that we need to do better about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness. And while we are creating all of these programs for intentional inclusion, for allyship, for here's, all of the resources you can learn from to be better and do better, the majority of those still don't empower you to unpack your own intersectionalities, let alone somebody else's. So in many ways, most of us are blind even to the depths of our own identity and how we express them, right? We don't think about the expression of our identity. When we say, I am, fill in the blank, how much time do we actually think about how to fill in that blank? Because it's automatic. I am an Indian American woman. I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist and consultant. I am an award-winning diversity, equity, and inclusion leader. I am fill in the blanks again. We don't think about it. It's automatically conditioned into us that I am follows whatever boxes we decide to put ourselves in, right? But truly speaking, if we want to be intentionally inclusive, then we need to be intentional about filling that or finishing that sentence, I am blank. That is actually one of the most important sentences in our lives, because based on how we finish that sentence, that then determines how much we believe in ourselves. That then determines how wholly we accept our own self. That determines how much we allow ourselves to belong and include ourselves, which then determines how much we empower others to belong and be included. So I don't know if you've all heard about this identity blindness thing. Again, several people have told me that I may have made it up. I'm not sure. It does stem back to intersectionality research by Kimberly Crenshaw. I highly suggest you look into this research. And again, there are a ton of social psychology research studies, evolutionary psychology research studies, and research from other disciplines of social science as well as physical sciences that talk about, or biological sciences rather, that talk about intersectionalities of diversity being a natural part of the lived experience of living entities. We see it in plants, we see it in animals, we see it in the human animal, we see it across the board. So how might you be perpetuating identity blindness? And more importantly, now that you're thinking about this, how are you in the future going to finish that sentence? I am blank. I'd love to hear from you because this is a fascinating conversation for me. So please drop it in the comments, and we can engage in a conversation on your being and your identity and how we can all move from blindness to seeing, from darkness to illumination on this, so that we can actually do better about inclusion and belongingness, and of course, equity. Thank you so much, and I'll be back on Monday. Bye.